hui for a submission for the proposal for vocational education and training. I'll start with a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. Kia hi aki ana te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauru ora. Welcome everyone, and thank you to those of you who have been able to join and who are representing your wider teams here who can't be with us. I'll just, for anyone that wasn't at the last meeting, we have made that video available. It's on the ATLAANZ website if you'd like to see it. Remembering that most of the documents that you need to kind of understand the consultation that's proposed are available on the TEC website. The consultation period closes on the 12th of September, but for us, we have an earlier deadline because we have an ATLAANZ exec meeting on the 9th of September, and at that meeting, we would need to be ratifying whatever submission we want to make. So a little bit earlier for that, so that the exec have time to review and approve what we choose to put in. So the focus really of today's session is much more to, rather than provide an overview of what's going on, because I think a lot of us have now had regional meetings or have a little bit of a better understanding of that now, is to really focus on what are the key issues that we want to submit collectively as ATLAANZ. So just a reminder that these are the main documents there's links there, and we'll make this presentation available, but these are the same links as in the ones that are on the ATLAANZ website now. And these are the links for making submissions. So there's three aspects of the consultation. And I guess my first question is, do we wish to make submissions on all three proposals or perhaps only one or two of those proposals? Proposal one is the main one, which is about restructuring polytechs into some standalone polytechs, which are likely to be the larger ones, and then a cluster of polytechs anchored to the open polytech, which would provide some services which appear to be mainly in terms of program development, development of online resources, so giving us access to online resources developed by the open polytech. I guess one of the difficulties we're having is a lack of clarity about how much and how many and which services might go into that cluster. The government's made it clear that that is not proposed to be a head office as such, but it certainly appears to be taking some head office functions from at least some polytechnics, things like finance, quality assurance, those kinds of processes. Perhaps what we don't know is whether learning development or learning services would be considered part of that back office function or not. Proposal 2 is related to workplace development councils, and really whether there's kind of one thing that does everything, or whether they have sort of two services, one which does the standard setting and qualification development, and then one that arranges the kind of delivery aspect of it. And then proposal 3 is around funding reform, so some quite major changes to funding. Again, the devil is in the detail, and we're not quite sure what that is. But effectively, Te Pūkenga just gets bulk funding, and so this would be moving back to something similar to the SAC funding that we used to have prior to Te Pūkenga, which is sort of based on number of learner enrolments typically. However, they're proposing some fairly fundamental changes to that, repurposing at least some, we don't know how much, of the equity-based funding, which is the learner component of that funding. And then there's this other pot of money to incentivize things in regions which had some link to job seeker support. It's a little bit vague, and how that differs from kind of strategic funding, and who gets to decide how that money is distributed is again a little bit unclear. So I guess our focus today is on what should ATLAANZ submission focus on. And I'm going to stop sharing now and hand over to Rowan Jeffrey from ARA, because the ARA team has been doing some work on this, and perhaps there might be some ideas in there that could inform an ATLAANZ contribution to sort of reinforce the ARA messages, or take some ideas from there. So Rowan, if you'd like to turn your mic on and share your screen.
Wasn't quite expecting that, but yeah, kia ora koutou. So to be clear, we haven't had a lot of time to work on this. So Georgie and I have just spent like pretty much the day yesterday pulling together what we could. What I did was go through the previous meeting, which I couldn't attend, and the issues that it seemed to me like had come up from that at the end of that meeting. And so we just trying to see if I can bring that up. We had then created a table and then just tried to put in as much as we could in terms of fleshing out those different areas. So I'm just going to try to bring it up. I wasn't quite prepared. So if it's not going to let me
Okay, I can
share
bring it up
my
if you
screen,
like.
but you have that doc
I'll
as
do
well,
that.
don't you? That I have to, yeah, for some reason it's not
Yes,
shareable
can be
mode.
I
think the reason that we did it in a table is that just the whole thing is a bit overwhelming, you know, like where do you start? And so, you know, when I pulled out those key areas that people had identified and just thought what's relevant to us, and then just put that in the table, and then we've just gone through and, to me, just to kind of make sense of it, pulled out, like it's a work in progress. We've still got it's not completed, but to look at what from the consultation document was relevant to that issue that had arisen, and then is there anything in there that we support, and then what are the concerns that we have about those about that particular issue. And there were quite a few about focus on online and blended learning that we'll probably keep fleshing out, and then for some of them we put in some suggested actions, but it's, you know, as I say, still a work in progress. And actually, when I thought about it last night, I thought that what I would do now probably with this is go back and pump up some of the keywords that they've put into the questions, because I realise that they've put in words like risks, barriers, and drawbacks. And so I think what might be useful for us now is to go back and put those words in there where we don't have them. This is a risk, this is a drawback of this proposal, this is a barrier, so that those words come through. And the reason I think that is that when we had the face-to-face meeting here, someone asked a really good question, which was, how are you going to analyze this material? Like, how are you going to, you know, trawl through all that information and decide, you know, how you're going to code it or whatever? And they said that they were going to look at, because what they were sort of asking was, are you going to favour submissions from groups or individuals or staff or community or any of that sort of thing? And what they said was that they were going to categorise the submissions. So if they come from staff, like particularly from a like a trades background, they might be categorising those. They'll be categorising community related submissions, employer submissions. So they've got lots of different categories like that. So I just wondered how they're going to do that. Like, are they going to AI?
Yeah,
Are they going to AI analyze it? In which case, having keywords is really important.
Yes.
Like, to make sure that they're going to pick those up, because if they're looking for risk, then we need to give them risk.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we just picked out the things we picked out. I mean, I don't know if you can see through there, was the focus on online and blended learning. What were the barriers? What were the risks of that? Somebody mentioned last time there wasn't really any mention of support services, where they'd be located, how they would be run. So that's a figure that point that we put in there. The focus on increasing foundation and trades. For us, there's concern there because basically that's already happening, and it has increased the need because there are many more neurodiverse learners, many more high needs learners who've been out of education for a while or who have struggled. And then I was thinking about those results today on literacy and numeracy tests that are going to flow through to us as well, and just thinking, oh my goodness, that's all coming our way with people who've had negative experiences. So we need to talk about the risk of that. Great to raise the numbers, but it's not going to work without support. So we wanted to put that in. And what are the other ones? Priority group funding change is very significant for us because we feel as though things may go backwards. So there's a bit on that. The international learner numbers as well. Trying to talk about the benefits and the risks of that, or the barriers for that. We didn't get very far with the pathway in and out of the federation. The local perspectives and iwi voice, we haven't really fleshed that out yet, and the learner voice perspectives. So those were areas that came up last time, and then I added in disability support and access, and because that's not very clear. And the other really good question that somebody asked at our face-to-face was, what about quality? Like,
Yes.
what are the systems going to be for ensuring quality? Is it all about financial viability? Or, how is this all going to work and actually produce the kind of vocational education that we want? So, I mean, it's a big document, even though we're still working on it. I guess for me, the thing I'd be interested in hearing what other people think is, how much do we put in? Like, are we better to put less than more and be really focused on the key risks and barriers? Or I don't really know. I don't know how much they're going to actually read of what we submit.
I agree that we don't know. However, if we don't submit now, then there's no way these things will be considered in the next round unless somebody else submits on it, right?
Yeah.
So if we want the next round to look different, to have more detail, to have considered some of these things, then I think we need to raise them now, because it doesn't look like they've been considered. And certainly we've had two presentations here at WIT. So one was probably the same one that everybody else has had from the TEC. And then one was from Olivia, who's our, or he, whatever we are, three, kind of temporary CEO, whatever you want to call her at the moment. And again, she presented some information about costs and income versus expenses and various things. But academic learning support, and indeed support services more generally, we're not part of that presentation. So does that mean we're not a focus because that's not where they see the problems as being? Like, is that part that just ticks on because it's okay, or is it that we're gone? Like, it's hard to understand what that absence of information actually is implying. So I think that's really useful because it's given us some quite clear focus areas, which I think are very similar to ones that have been coming up in other contexts and other discussions as well. Yes, sorry.
Oh, sorry. One more thing is, I went back to our previous submissions because I remembered some of the stuff, and some of what we put in there has come from the previous submissions. And I see you've loaded those up as well, Dawn. There were three in particular, I think, that were really useful. One that was the local context, one that was about priority learners, and I can't remember the other one, but that was quite helpful too. So thanks for putting those up.
Yeah, so I think I'll just show people now if I can. I've lost you all. Hang on a minute. So what so as the ATLAANZ exec, we have a OneDrive where we share information. So what I've done is created a folder within that area for this consultation that we're doing. So hopefully you can see what's in that folder at the moment. So this top folder here was the recording in the PowerPoint from our last hui, which we've also put on the ATLAANZ website. This folder here is the previous submissions that ATLAANZ made to the kind of to Pūkenga structure proposal document in 2023. So that's the one that Rowan was just referring to, where there are some ideas and some references and things in there that we could perhaps pull into this document. So this one here is the document that Rowan was just discussing, pulled together by Ara, which I think has some really useful information. And then this is a draft document where we have started trying to pull together a submission. It's at very early stages at the moment. So if I just open that, I've just put some background about what ATLAANZ is, which of the Te Pūkenga institutions we have members at, which is pretty much all of them, I believe, and who has attended meetings. So obviously I'll add whoever's here today that isn't there before. And then people have been dropping in some ideas and suggestions and beginning work on writing there, but it's very much draft, not necessarily reflecting everybody's views or consensus views, so there may need to be substantial changes there. So I will, let me find the folder level, drop the link to that. Let's go back one more for that, so that you can all get into there. Oops, that's not what I wanted, sorry. Where's your chat? So I'll just drop that link into the chat so that if you want to go into that folder, you should be able to get in. Please feel free to add any documents. So for example, if your teams have done some discussion and you want to put that in for other people to see, or if you want to add directly to the draft, maybe you've got some references or sources that are useful for backing up some of the points that we're making. Please, that's a collective space. Please use that space. Claire, you had a question. Remote.
I did, sorry. I was busy copying and pasting the chat link. Sorry, I was just going to, it wasn't a question, it was a comment more. And I think Rowan and Georgie's process is a really good one. I started to do a similar one yesterday as well, and I just chucked some themes and read in that initial shared document that you'd circulated. I think on the point around, you know, how much level of detail do we go into, just commenting from a person that has worked for government and has analysed submissions through a consultation process before, I think the clearer you make the point, and I think it's very wise to highlight risks, barriers, and whatever that other keyword is that they said, because that will be what they're hunting for. And if they do use AI in some form to do it, that's definitely what they'll pull. I think, though, to be as clear and concise as possible is probably a better way to go. Yes, definitely raise all the points, because we may not have another chance to raise them, but as concisely and to the point as possible, I think is probably key. That was all I was going to suggest.
So do you think it might be worthwhile perhaps then just kind of listing, you know, bullet point and then expanding so that those
Probably.
statements are,
I think
yeah.
if you can make it as easy for them to find as possible.
Yeah.
that's probably the best way to set it out, because otherwise it's going to get lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any, Tanya, did you have, oh, Tanya's on the phone. Does anyone else have anything that they want to comment or add at this point?
I'll put in the chat, but I found Ruth Thomas's article in the journal on learning support for distance learners was really good for raising points about, you know, the whole, if you're focusing too much on online learning, you need to offer the support. So that's quite a good one for sort of raising key issues there.
That's a good, yeah, suggestion.
Mm.
I think that's one of the things that, you know, when I started drafting things, I was thinking, well, hang on, how are we going to sort of back up these points? So I think referencing things like, you know, the code for international and pastoral care, those kinds of documents, or, I mean, I guess it's difficult to know which bits of the Education Act they're going to keep and change, because obviously that will need to be changed when Te Pūkenga is disestablished. Okay, so I might see if I put that over there. Can you see that notes now? Are you still looking at the, PowerPoint now? Yeah, okay, good. And the need for additional, I can't remember what that was for distance learners. So I'm just trying to capture the conversation as we go. So Shelley.
Kia ora, everyone. Yeah, just a few things. Firstly, I really thank you for that work, Ro, and that table is really useful, and I really quite like how that actually is quite succinct, and I think covers a lot of the common ground that maybe we want to respond to. And then also the comment about backing up, but I found it really interesting to go onto TEC and look at like the tertiary education strategy and the other plans around disability. And I think also, you know, that's the thing, like, yeah, how do these proposals align with what's in those strategies and plans? And yeah, I'm just finding that a really interesting place of, you know, how can they demonstrate that alignment? The other thing that I'm really quite interested in is if they're talking about this blended learning model, which is obviously very much they're seeing as the answer to all, you know, as academic support, are they seeing us as part of that blended learning environment? Because this is what happens. They talk very much about the learning environment, and they're not talking about the support environment and where we fit into that. And then there's that shared responsibility, in fact, between us and the tutors. So it's like, how does that relationship sort of be maintained in this regional but also multi-federation kind of model?
Yeah, kia ora, Shelley. I think that was a really good point that you raised, which is always something that we end up having to defend and to talk about and remind our institutes, which is that learning environment versus support environment. As learning advisors, we are often having to inform people, please remember us, because we are academics alongside your tutors or your academic staff. So a number of us are. So try and remember that when you're thinking about that blended environment or that learning environment versus that support environment. I think that's something that we often clash with them about, which is this constant need to remind them, don't forget that you are dealing with staff who may not be in schools, but are academics as well.
Yeah, as a campus that has provided, and we've I guess trialed a bunch of blended learning approaches and programs where we have low numbers. The need for further academic support is huge. So we could probably, and I'm sure others have done this too, but you know, our evidence, because we've been collecting evidence in terms of levels of support for those programs, and it has increased. Yeah, so that's worthwhile making a note of or pointing out to support some of the statements we want to make too, probably.
Rowan? You're on mute, Rowan.
Sorry. Yep. I just wonder, and Georgie raised this when she looked at the introduction to the submission, do we need to actually put right at the beginning a few statements about what learning advisors do, like that we're an integral part of the academic environment within the institutions, because I agree with you, Tania, we're always explaining ourselves and, you know, it doesn't need to be long, but it needs to just really pinpoint where our information is coming from, you know, our experience and knowledge, what part of the whole system we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey guys, I just want to tap onto that. I'm Rowan. Yeah, that was 100% something that was brought up at our MOE-TEC conversation, and they asked, so what about this quality? You know, what's going to happen with the online blended? So Gillian from the TEC was speaking to, and she mentioned, so we're going to have to make sure that we rely on the support services available. And I thought, oh, here we go. Yeah, so we're definitely going to be a definite need within this online blended learning, but how's that going to look for us after these changes? And I guess that's where the question lies, is what is the impact going to be for us? Is it going to be that they are going to not need us, or they're going to just rely on the anchor Open Polytechnic support staff, or because potentially they know that the need is going to increase, are we fine within our regions to operate as is? And I think that's the question that we really need them to answer.
There's no doubting that there'll be an increase, I think, in our work, because we're already experiencing that with students who are opting, given the climate and the difficulties they're experiencing financially to live. One of the aspects that is being raised is that we've got a lot of students who now just want to gain their support. For example, online. I run a writing club on a Friday. It's offered both face-to-face and online. Earlier in the year, I would have said that the face-to-face saw more traffic, but now we're seeing a lot more online traffic, and blended learning in the classroom and even online is impacting on the availability of staff. There's a higher demand. I agree with you, Santana, which is if people are already indicating that we're short of staff, that we need to have the supports. I'm getting an increase of traffic flow from different schools saying we need your support, but when you're limited, so it's going to impact on us, and therefore probably we need more staff on board. And I don't know what that's working like for you guys, or looking like for you guys.
I guess one of the unknowns is because obviously at the moment we provide both face-to-face and online support, and we go into classes and do workshops. Potentially under a federation, that online support might shift from us to some Open Poly back office or not, right? Or could it be the case that actually we might be asked to do more online support for students for other federated polytechnics? So we might get more of that. Because one of the things that I'm really unclear about in this is what are the wins for Open Poly, right? Because, okay, federated polytechnics get to use all Open Poly's learning resources, as some of us are already, like which is already offering some programs using resources developed at ATA, resources developed at Open Poly and other places. But what do they get out of it? And in some kind of a funding sharing arrangement, what is the part of that funding and service provision that goes to Open Poly so that they are getting a gain versus what is going to be within the federated polytechnics. So potentially, would some of Open Polytechnics services that are currently contracted out, like marking, like online learning support, like something else, be pushed out to the federation to save them money? Otherwise, they're basically just losing EFTS funding, aren't they? They're losing EFTS to the regions. So yeah, are they gaining staff, losing staff, sharing workload? And it's very unclear on that. I think Santana, you were next, and then Claire.
I think Claire's first.
Okay, cool, Claire.
You're so kind. It really didn't matter, Santa. Yeah, well, I'm just wondering if we got anyone from Open Poly today. I know we did last week.
No, we had Emma last week, but we don't seem to have anyone today. And
Okay.
actually, a number of the invitations that I sent to our members there bounced. So perhaps we had some staffing
my
changes.
comment was going to be, having met a few from the Open Poly, they don't actually have a lot of learning support staff at all. In fact, very, very few. So yeah, and I'm sure you guys do too, we often get inquiries from students that live in our rohi that are studying through Open Poly, want to come and use our services. Because they want some face-to-face local support so they can be supported, because they're not getting a lot through that channel. So yeah, I too am wondering what are the wins for Open Poly, because I just don't quite understand that.
No, and I don't think they do either. My impression is that like this has been thrust upon them. This isn't something that they necessarily have chosen or want or understand. Yeah, they're in the same information void, I think, that we are. Yeah. Santana?
Yeah, sorry, 100% agree with what you guys are talking about currently, but I just want to go back to what you were talking about and how, what does Open Poly get out of this, And at our hui with TEC and MOE, the term collaborative versus competitive came up, and is it a collaborative approach, this federation, or is it just going to turn competitive? And like you were saying, with the efforts, like how does that work? Like I'm saying where, as in I'm assuming Toyo Homai are going to be within this federation because of financial unsustainability, but non-viability. How's that, how are we going to be grouping these people that are all currently, in deficits, that are then working collaboratively but competitively at the same time? How does that work?
Yeah.
It's just a question that was that was raised, and they couldn't answer it, which is probably something worth mentioning in anyone's submission feedback, because how does that work?
Yeah. And particularly for those polytechs that are wanting to move out of the federation towards standalone in the medium to long term, clearly they want to be competitive and want to retain their staffing and their IP and all that stuff in order to show that they could stand up either individually or perhaps in a merger situation with some others to make them viable. Yeah. No, and I think, there was a lack of clarity. And it was very clear to us here at WIT that the TEC staff were not necessarily defending the proposal. they were outlining the proposal, but they clearly had their own concerns, and the advice that the minister has given has not all been followed. So I think they are hoping that we will raise some of the things that they have already raised, and yeah, that might get a stronger voice.
I'm sorry, I forgot what I was going to say, but I've just remembered. So at our meeting, they brought up, are we going to continue to be legal entities as divisions? And the Gillian from the TEC said, yes, we would all remain our legal entity in our divisions and what we are called. And then the next question was, okay, so if we were to be within this federation model, how easy will it be to be able to, and then they said this massive word that I couldn't quite remember right now, but kind of revert back into your standalone independence. And the MOE guy, Nick Huntington, he was like, and they looked at each other and they kind of tried their best not to react in front of everyone, but they had no choice. And they said, yeah, it's going to be a process to get back out. And so we thought straight away, like, oh, we're getting, we need to really look into our submission about what's it going to look like being in that federation, and how easy is it going to be to come out of that federation as a standalone, before we can even submit or consult what our thoughts are.
Yeah. Shelley.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like there's an infrastructure question here too, because the more they push towards blended, the more they push towards, computer-based, whether it's within courses or even, for our mahi in terms of supports. Like I think the more embedded we get into a broader infrastructure system, the harder it's going to be to extract ourselves from that. I mean, because those systems, they're expensive, and nobody, they're talking about like the finances in terms of the students, but they're not really outlining like how they're going to fund this massive federation alignment and all that's involved. So like I don't see how, if a whole lot gets invested in kind of coming together, how you would then be able to extract yourself again from that over dependence. I think there's going to be a lot of over dependence that starts to happen.
And how is that different from Te Pūkenga?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Te Pūkenga light, isn't it? It's Te Pūkenga with an opt-out clause if you're financially viable. Yeah.
With supposedly no head office, however, a bunch of head office functions
No, we have
are
an
being
anchor.
based.
We have an anchor. Yeah, Te Pūkenga.
Yeah, the other thing that we were chortling at was this idea that it was going to be round table governance. I mean, that's always fraught, because who's inputting their hand up in terms of decision making and how that flows down? I think that even that structure is unclear and muddy.
And yeah, if we're all offering the same program using open polytext resources, that has significant implications for like quality assurance, moderation. How do we ensure the same standards are being met at different institutions and being marked by different tutors, and how do we feed back to that? Like if we identify problems, what is the mechanism for feeding that back to ensure that changes are made to the programs to address those issues? Certainly one of the problems we have had with buying in programs from other institutions is that there's a whole lot of links there that link to resources that that institution holds. We don't necessarily have the same subscriptions, library services, books available. Links are behind paywalls, and our students don't have access to the same information that they need to produce quality assessments. So that unless all of the information services were part of the programs as well, then the problems we've had with resourcing would be repeated writ large. And certainly one of the benefits we had with Te Pūkenga was we got access to some new databases that we haven't been able to afford or fund before. And now that we are slashing budgets, they're gone again. So our nursing students now don't have access to Sanal, for example. Well, they do this year, but they won't next year because that line's gone from the budget. So, if there were links to Sanal resources, that would need to be part of what was federated because we can't afford it ourselves. We could only afford it with Te Pūkenga. I think that the minister has been deliberately vague on who gets to stand alone and who doesn't. And that's certainly a big sword hanging over the heads of some. There are some assumptions about who will stand alone. It seems likely that this merger in Auckland will stand alone. Probably Wintec will stand alone. But some that might have thought or be thinking that they have a pathway to standing alone may or may not. And I'm thinking the likes of Ara and Toihohomai here. Some of us are clearly not going to stand alone. I'm thinking Wit, UCO, Whitira, Welltech, Taipōtini, NMIT. So yeah, there's a probably standalone, possibly standalone, and unlikely to stand alone, I guess, pots at the moment. And for some institutions, the not knowing is clearly going to be very challenging. Who was next? Anthea?
I think I was second.
We're too polite.
Yeah, okay. I agree with you that is a big issue about not knowing whether you're going to stand alone or not, and it feels at ARA that is put a whole lot of pressure on budgets. Like budgets are really, really tight, and that is because they're saying, well, if you want to stand alone, you need to increase by this number of hundreds of EFTs in order to be showing your financial viability. So it's putting on huge amounts of pressure, and I think they're deliberately doing that to cut budgets.
And I mean, the budget cuts are just getting ridiculous. Sorry, are they going to take the light bulbs out next? It's crazy. Yeah. Anthea?
Kia ora koutou. I just introduce myself. I'm Tania's colleague from Wintec. And I just was interested in what you were saying that Wintec was likely to stand alone. And has that been written somewhere?
Not in the proposal, no. Where that's coming from is from that specialist advisory group document that was released to RNZ under the Official Information Act, and that was suggesting that there would be 7 standalones and then 6 plus open poly in the federation. But my sense is that the government won't do as many as 7. And there was a list of them somewhere in that document. I can locate that, Anthea, and pass it on to you.
Yeah, because we under the Te Pūkenga system, I think we had been put with, was it Toihohomai and EIT, I think, or at least Toihohomai. So I guess we had been psyching up to be in Rohe too. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But
so I have located that. So if you go to the links that are here, it's this one here. So Special Advisor Group recommendations.
Oh, okay.
The very last page of that is a table. I might just see if I can click through for you. The very last page is this table here. And here, this is sort of what the federation model is based on, this recommendation, but not quite the same. And it says 7 viable entities re-establish, Unitec plus MIT merged, Wintec, EIT, NMIT, ARA, Otago, SIT, 6 non-viable entities held alongside Open Polytech of New Zealand, and they were calling it Holdco, the government's calling it Federation. So that's North Tech, Toyohomai, WIT, UCOL, Whitireia Welltech, and Tai Otani Polytech. However, my sense from things said in the media and other places is that there won't be 7 standing up. There might be 3 or 4.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where that is stated, which is not the proposal. That's the advice that informed the proposal. However, that advice recommended this 8. So clearly that advice wasn't taken. Yeah, that's probably, I found that quite useful, but we're not being consulted on that. We're being consulted on Federation, the Workplace Development Council replacement, and the funding shifts. Yeah. Down.
Can I just ask one more question? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here last week, and I presume that you've talked about this already. But I guess one of my big concerns with the whole funding shift is if things are moving towards more online support, where does that leave all the learners who they just don't gel with the whole online thing? Like you've got some people come to us who've been out of study for 20 or 30 years, and they're just completely lost when it comes to online support. And even younger people, in the past, I remember I had this young this Indian guy, and I realized I had assumed that he would be a digital native. And then when he sat down with me, he said, I've never done an assignment before that isn't handwritten. He said everything he did in the past was handwritten, and he had no idea about doing anything on a computer. And I just sort of wonder for, the international students, older students who've been out of study, disabled, people who don't have access to technology, doesn't that just make it harder for them to access education? So was that talked about? I suppose that must have been talked about last week when I wasn't here.
Last week we really just kind of outlined the documents and what was in them and what we were being consulted on. We didn't get as much into this level of where would we like to submit. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'd be really concerned definitely about that over-reliance on online. Because I myself am not a digital native, so I think that would be challenging for me if I was trying to help other people who weren't that great with online platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, if there's something that COVID taught us is that those barriers can be very wide between who has the resources and capability to engage with digital tools. Shelley?
Yeah, again, it's just it would be really good to hear from Open Poly. Maybe it's a question we can put to the team about how they do engage with their international learners. What their numbers are. Is that contributing to why their strengths? Because I suppose one of the advantages of blended learning is you can kind of go, and it's multi-regional, but also you can go way beyond your borders. So is that kind of part of the approach to the thinking? And then I'd want to know, is that something that Open Poly kind of has, that's a point of difference, And are they engaging with their international learners in that way, you know, remotely or not?
Rowan.
I was just looking back at what's in the document already, and I see that one that I'm just going back a step to the costs of setting up the federation, including the infrastructure, the technology, you know, sharing a room with a library manager, and all the work that's gone into the sharing of all the databases and setting up those systems through to Pūkenga has been huge. It's included a huge amount of work, a huge amount of time and money. Where is that funding coming from? Like, I think that's a risk that it'd be good for us to highlight, that it's going to cost a lot of money to set those things up, and I don't see that outlined anywhere.
Exactly, and I mean that's what that bulk funding kind of enabled, right? If you're returning back to something equivalent to funding per student, yeah, where is that? Yeah, collective, I guess, spending happening.
And
Yeah.
and it really will be a barrier.
It's massive. Yeah.
As we talked about, like, to move in and out, you can't move in and out of something that's got all that structure already set up.
No.
It would be pretty nigh impossible.
Yeah, and just going off that, Rowan, before I forget, that was asked straight after the collaborative, competitive, you know, outlook, and they said no, we would be acting as our own and just doing business as normal, but under a council for each division. So each division has a council. We don't need to share resources. We don't need to share that. But these are conversations once in the federation that can be had if people are willing to, I guess, not merge, but share resources or share databases or share systems and how that looks financially. And that would be off the basis of what the councils would recommend then. But I feel like we need to have these conversations before that is, you know, before we are categorized as a federation. I say we on the assumption that Toyohomai is within this federation.
I think certainly initially Toyohomai is in this federation.
It's too late afterwards, and that was a really strong point at our meeting as well. You want us to feed back on this, but you are not giving enough detail. How are people supposed to know what they, you know, what are they weighing up? What are the options they're weighing up? And they were very kind of, oh well, we kind of know that, but do it anyway.
Yeah, it's like, what is this federation? What is the comprise of this federation going to be for those within the federation? How is that going to look first and foremost? Then we can kind of comment on, okay, so, you know.
Yeah.
And I
but
guess
I don't think this will be the last consultation round, right? I think that there will then be another consultation on the structure of the federation.
Well, if you saw their spectrum of timeline and timeframes, there was no other time allowance for another consultation. And the turnover between this consultation and then legislation is not vast, like it's not. And so that was one of the questions we raised. So what happened with the last consultation we were involved with Te Pūkenga is that Te Pūkenga found out they had a vast amount of submissions they needed to sift through, and they couldn't even keep up with their timeline. And this timeline between 2025, you've got October to December to look through all of this consultation. And then from January 2025, we're going into legislation for 9 months. Like, where's the time? And so that was the question asked. Where is the time allowance for looking through this, you know, otherwise are we even looking through everyone's submissions, or is this something that we are just checklisting, that we're making sure everyone has a say but we're not sieving through what they are saying? And so that was a
we can
bold
neither
question.
confirm nor deny, but
yeah, that was a bold
certainly
question.
have an opinion.
There was a bold question that was asked, and they couldn't respond. They said, we'll have to see how many submissions come through. And so I guess their timeline is not fixed, but I guess their timeline is fixed because they are needing to make this legislation before, I guess, any politics comes into play or anything like that.
Coming back to that question of, like, if you're in the federation, do you ever get out? Or and like that competition versus collaboration. I sort of wonder if once the federation is set up, that will actually be in competition with any freestanding polytechs around the country anyway, who will then eventually be swallowed up into the federation, and we'll just have Te Pūkenga again, except maybe without the priorities that a lot of us actually did buy into. I don't know.
Yes, I mean, I thought that as well. Like, how does, say, WinTech, which might be one of the ones that stands alone, for example, how does WinTech compete with the Federation's offerings and presumably, you know, reduce cost of service because of its larger size? Does it then become not viable and have to join the Federation? Not that necessarily, you know, it could be any. I'm just using WinTech as an example. But yeah, if there are savings to be made through size, then the bigger the federation gets, the harder it is for the unfederated models to compete equally.
And I guess that's why it's collaborative versus competitive, because I mean, we're all collaborating in this federation, but then we're all competing within the federation to try and get out of the federation, you know?
Or still just for international students, or for sufficient numbers for this program to be viable to deliver locally, or for whatever. There is still an element of competition. Yeah.
So Dawn, we have a lot of notes. What are we? What's our next steps?
That is a very good question. So at our last hui, Claire, Shelley and Georgie offered to contribute to a writing group. It certainly is a huge task, and so we would really like other people to be available to contribute to that writing group. Those people may choose to meet outside of these 3 scheduled hui that I set up. And that work within that OneDrive space, obviously anyone can contribute to, and that needs to be ongoing. So what I would hope is that by the next one of these hui, we would have some kind of substantial drafting that people could then look at and discuss, and perhaps with a view to, I don't know, simplifying things or taking things out or distilling down the areas that we want to submit. I think that framework from ATA has given us quite a good basis maybe to focus the submission, and certainly I can look at putting in some bits at the beginning about what learning advisors do. And the other thing I guess that's really useful is, you know, let's draw on the Hive brain for suggestions of documents that actually support the positions that we want to say. So we had a really good suggestion of a publication today about blended learning, and some of those other documents that you might be familiar with or refer to day to day, other people might not. So if you could throw those references in there just to reduce the kind of hunting around research time for others, that would be really helpful as well. So is there anyone else that is keen to really work on the drafting of that submission that I can add to that list?
I've got some time, I can donate to it.
Yeah. Okay, and you've got access to those documents, Rowan? Yeah, good. Okay, great. So let's, I guess, continue working in the meantime and come together again in a week to review the submission as it's progressing. Thank you, everybody. Mindful of time, so I'll close us with a karakia. Unuhia, I te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te aratakatū. Koirā I rongo, whakairia ake ki runga, kia wātia, ai rā, kua wātia, hau pai marire. Thanks, everyone, and see you again in a week, I hope.
Thanks, Dawn. See ya.